So things are changing pretty fast in America right now. And I posted a video yesterday, which I'd recorded a week before, and it already feels very dated. It's like, a week ago, the Paris Agreement felt like a pretty big deal. It still is a big deal, but there's a lot of other stuff that seems a bit more front burner. And a lot of my friends are pretty overwhelmed, discouraged, panicking even, and just wanted to share some reflections on talking to different friends of mine about what's going on and listening to different public figures like, Bernie, AOC, Jon Stewart, some legal scholars I'll talk about. And hopefully you find some of it helpful. The basic theme of this video is what's going on at the moment and how to avoid being too overwhelmed. I'm not going to try to cover everything going on, and even if I did, everything could be different in a couple days by the time I post this. So I'm mostly going to just talk about the general issue of overwhelm and managing the flood of information, plus a little bit of a deep dive on the inspectors general. And I think the basic problem is underreaction and overreaction. Well, a lot of people are concerned about a lot of things that Trump is doing. You don't want to underreact. If something concerning is happening, you don't want to, but you also don't want to just chase every single rabbit and be exhausted constantly. And one interesting kind of touch point for this is the recent Jon Stewart, where he was basically saying, how upset should we be about what, and how do we manage this type of overwhelm?
What's the news freaking out about closer to home?
Friday night massacre.
Late Friday night purge. A chilling purge.
The purge.
Ah! What is this purge about exactly?
Breaking news, the mass firing of government agency watchdogs.
Trump fired at least 17 inspectors general.
No! What's the matter? Why do I have an axe?
There is a specific law that requires notice, 30 days, and a statement of reasons, substantive and detailed rationale.
What? I'm sorry, what? Oh, apparently you can fire them, but you have to give them 30 days notice. Oh, so that's what we're upset about? No! You can do it, but not in that font!
A lot of people, including me, had a bad taste about the specific example of the inspectors general. Basically, they were fired without 30 days notice, which is required by law. And I just don't think we should start by immediately blowing this off. Let's take that part seriously, the inspectors general. So it's fair to say his take is a bit too blasé. But I think the basic point stands. It's like we have to figure out how to manage this, like shepherding your cortisol budget.
But this is the cycle we find ourselves in. First law of Trumpodynamics. Every action is met with a very not equal overreaction, thus throwing off our ability to know when shit is actually getting real.
He also says, which I'll say more about later, you can't just be reactive. You can't just be saying Trump sucks. You have to have a vision for the future. You have to have something positive to say about what Democrats would do if they were in power. So I think public media is really important in moments like this. It's important in general, but I think PBS, BBC, similar networks are less inclined to be sensationalistic. So I'm just trying to consume less social media and see what PBS, BBC, and Associated Press are saying, just to at least get a baseline for the facts. I think it's worth keeping an eye on what AOC and Bernie are saying. I think of them as kind of the leaders of the Democratic opposition, even though they're not in very senior positions. John Fetterman is more kind of center-left and very independent. He just kind of talks like a normal person. So I think those three are worth following. But Bernie has a YouTube. AOC is on Blue Sky, which is a new Twitter-like. It's basically a Twitter clone, and might sound complicated. It's not. You don't have to download the app. You can just go to her page on Blue Sky in a web browser, and you can see her posts. So public media, opposition figures, political scientists, and there's one political scientist in particular that I would really recommend everyone follow. You can follow his channel on YouTube. doesn't have a lot of followers. He doesn't really promote it. And his name's Frank Fukuyama. And I'm especially interested in following what he has to say about what's going on the past week or so and the coming weeks, because he's very knowledgeable about not just the current state of the American bureaucracy.
You've written a lot about Schedule F. Interestingly, I would have thought that the implementation of Schedule F would have been like on day one. But
no, it was.
It was?
No, all that's in place. For those that are not following this intensively, Schedule F was an executive order at the end of the first Trump administration that basically would have put all civil servants on a at-will basis so that they could simply be fired without cause. And it was rescinded because Trump lost the election and Biden reversed that. But now Trump has reversed Biden's reversal.
He also knows the history. If you want to read a book that talks about this in detail, his recent-ish book, Political Order and Political Decay. It's part 2 of a series that started with prehistory. Excellent pair of books. The second one, which I mentioned first, Political Order and Political Decay, starts with the French Revolution and takes us up to the present day with many chapters talking about American history, specifically the evolution of the American government and civil service.
Up until the 1820s, the American government was really run by the friends of George Washington. It was a kind of elite, a lot of them graduates of Harvard and Yale, kind of the elite of this gentry, planter, merchant elite in the United States in the decades after the Revolution. This all changed in the 1828 election, which was the first one that under the newly revised expanded franchise in most American states, and it was the beginning of the populist tradition led by Andrew Jackson. John Quincy Adams, who lost that election, was a typical Boston Brahmin. He traveled in Europe. He was a graduate of Harvard University. His father was the second president of the United States. Andrew Jackson was a frontiersman from rural Tennessee, Scotch-Irish, a drinker, a brawler. And when he was elected in that election, there was a heavy kind of anti-elite character to his campaign. He said the ordinary people of the United States don't want, these graduates of Harvard running the country. And when he got into office, he said 2 things. First of all, I won the election, so I should appoint who works in the U.S. government. And secondly, he didn't put it quite in these terms, but in effect he said, any idiot can be a federal bureaucrat. And this is what inaugurates this long 100-year period in American history known as the spoils system or the patronage system. As it spreads through all levels of state, local, and federal government, you get to the point by the time of the Civil War, and virtually every member of the U.S. government was put there as a result of a payoff from a politician to some political supporter. Key moment that shifts this away from patronage is the assassination of Garfield, who's elected in 1882. He takes about 6 weeks to die because he's shot by an would-be office seeker. Congress, at this point, has no interest in reforming the system because that's how they all got to power. But because of this triggering event, they're all embarrassed, and even before the next Congress is voted into office, they vote for the Pendleton Act that establishes the first United States Civil Service Commission and the principle that you ought to be appointed on the basis of merit and technical expertise and not as a result of patronage.
So I'm eagerly looking forward to any new video that he may post. The last video he posted was about 8 days ago. So it was before a lot of the current stuff took place. So consider following Francis Fukuyama. Consider picking up Political Order and Political Decay if you want to dive a little deeper. I think it's good to check in with what's being said in the legal community about these various actions by Trump. There was a group called Checks and Balances. It was basically like libertarian-ish Federalist Society people who were worried about Trump overreach. So they started this group called Checks and Balances, and I think it's now called the Society for the Rule of Law. Their website doesn't have a ton of updates, but for example, they have an update about birthright citizenship that I think would have been helpful to see that day, basically saying like, this is not going to make it past the court, so don't chase that rabbit too hard. So let's talk a little bit about the inspectors general specifically. So I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a legal scholar, don't take anything I say except with a grain of salt, but it is worth noting there's a conservative legal scholar named Jack Goldsmith.
We need a strong presidency, but a strong presidency accountable under law. And those two things need to go together.
I'm not familiar with his work, but he does seem pretty well respected and a straight shooter, even if you disagree with him. I don't think he's just a partisan ideologue. So, for example, a month ago, he had an interview with Bill Kristol where he was, criticizing Donald Trump for his pardons the previous term.
So we've had a downward spiral of these norms. The Biden pardon is definitely a big step in the downward spiral because of the use of the pardon power, because I agree, Trump was incomparable in his abuse. I mean, many dozens, and I think hundreds. I actually listed all of these and studied them all. I have a chart on this. And I think something like, I can't remember the number, but the person I did it with, we concluded that about 70% of the pardons were for friends or friends of friends.
He's capable and willing of disagreeing with Donald Trump on something, but his take is basically probably the Supreme Court would say this is constitutional to fire these people because the law, which is recent from 2022, the law saying you need these 30 days, it just may not be constitutional. There's precedent for saying that. That's one opinion. And then you have Noah Feldman. Noah Feldman is also a professor at Harvard Law, and he wrote a piece saying, I'm not totally convinced, but he also wasn't disagreeing with Jack Goldsmith very sharply. He's, I think, less focused on the specific illegality of the firing and more on the larger agenda where this might set up a Supreme Court case and the Supreme Court might rule, yeah, you can kind of fire anyone. So that's what I think is going on with the inspectors general. You have some debate going on about it in the legal community. It doesn't seem to be crystal clear. And then finally, one of the points Jon Stewart made that I think is important, you got to have a vision for the future. We can't go through 4 years just saying Trump bad. You can't just say Democrats are Trump times -1. That is not appealing. That was already rejected in the election. And there has to be a positive vision for the future. What I've seen about this since then, what I've seen in that department in the past few days is a tweet from AOC and a video from Bernie, which I think are worth mentioning. Bernie's video is fairly short. You can watch the whole thing. But towards the end, he's saying, we have to have a platform and a vision for the future that the country can unite behind and not just be focused on the negative. And for him, that is 3 big planks. One is healthcare, so Medicare for all, universal healthcare.
The American people do not want cuts to Medicaid and the privatization of Medicare. They understand that healthcare is a human right, not a privilege. We must continue the struggle for Medicare for all so that every American has the healthcare that he or she needs. That's not a radical idea. That's what Americans want.
That's what AOC says as well. She's basically saying, we got to have a vision for the future. And for her, a big part of that is guaranteed health care. Second plank from Bernie's video, raise the minimum wage.
Federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour is a starvation wage. If you work 40 hours a week in America, you should not be living in poverty.
It's very popular. Third one is affordable housing.
All over this country, we have a major housing crisis. And it's not just 800,000 who are homeless. It is millions of working families who are spending 40, 50, 60% of their limited incomes on housing. We have got to build millions of units of low-income and affordable housing. And when we do that, we put large numbers of people to work at good-paying union jobs.
I think this one's complicated. I don't feel like I understand how the federal government can play a role in the affordable housing crisis. I'm more familiar with the state efforts in California. Gavin Newsom has done a lot to try to encourage building among localities in California. So I don't have a good sense for the details of what that would involve, but there is a massive housing crisis, and it is also very popular in polling, apparently. polling's not everything, but I think it is important to gut check what policies are popular, because if you wage a campaign on unpopular policies and then lose, that's not very skillful. So the affordability of housing is a crisis. There should be some response, and it is also very popular. It's getting more and more alarming to more and more people. So try not to overreact to every little rabbit. Try to follow reputable news like PBS, BBC for the basic facts. Try to follow academics and scholars and people that can maybe provide a bit more insight and not just sort of media hot takes. And we have to fight for a future that is better than what we have and that is more positive than just not Trump.